These days, as companies and studios attempt to appeal to queer people and their allies, while far-right media outlets feign victimhood and outrage to court their audiences, news stories about so-called secretly gay characters come a dime a dozen. But one such debate has quietly raged for decades. Is SpongeBob SquarePants gay? Now, the earliest significant example of SpongeBob gay speculation I could find is a 2002 Wall Street Journal piece attributing the rumors to the show's, quote, sunny optimism, weird psychedelic world, and peculiar humor. According to People magazine, in 2005, when asked if SpongeBob or any other character were intended to be gay, show creator Stephen Hillenburg said, "No, we never intended them to be gay. I consider them to be almost asexual." You'd think such a comment would put the debate to rest. SpongeBob is an asexual king. He is, after all, a sponge. Sea sponges are hermaphrodites and reproduce asexually.
Can you reproduce by budding? Can ya?
Thus, SpongeBob doesn't even theoretically have a sex, though he does seem to identify with a masculine gender in the show. Perhaps Mr. SquarePants is homoromantic. He and Patrick are extremely close after all, and some of their behavior could be seen as romantic, such as SpongeBob buying Patrick a present on Valentine's Day.
I love you.
This is actually contrary to a tendency in media observed by Professor Ellen Carter when researching romance novels with asexual characters. The tendency is to translate ace experience into an allosexual language, i.e. putting them in sexual situations and assigning them degrees of desire in order to fit in with expectations.
Gary! I was just looking for the sports channel, Gary.
However, intentional or not, there are very few such examples in SpongeBob, despite the occasional joke or two that may or may not have adult connotations.
Look, doubloons! Don't drop them.
So after Stephen Hillenburg seemingly put this to rest, the debate cooled considerably. But then, on June 13th, 2020, the official Nickelodeon account tweeted this: celebrating #Pride with the LGBTQ+ community and their allies, showing a rainbow-colored SpongeBob alongside trans actor Michael D. Cohen and bisexual animated character Corn. Now, this could have been in reference to SpongeBob's aforementioned asexuality, surely a part of the plus in LGBTQ+, or if not that, he could have simply been one of the allies mentioned. But that didn't stop the debate from raging back to life. A CNN article inspired by the tweet described the, quote, long debate about SpongeBob's sexuality, an article Nickelodeon declined to comment on, leaving rumors and Twitter feuds floating around the vast abysses of the internet. But regardless of SpongeBob's sexuality, the show itself and SpongeBob's character feel undeniably queer.
That hat makes you look like a girl.
Am I a pretty girl?
For one thing, in SpongeBob's appearance, he walks the borderlands between sea sponge and kitchen sponge. Also, he feels like both an adult and a child at the same time, as he has a job and lives on his own, but also has a high-pitched voice with a youthful demeanor and sense of humor. And then you have the show's meta-narratives, domestic satire, binaries between underwater and surface life, critiques of capitalism, environmental messaging, blurred lines between species. Suddenly, this show is queer as hell. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's look at some specific examples. In what's probably the show's most undeniably queer episode, Rockabye Bivalve, SpongeBob and Patrick adopt a tiny sea scallop. The scallop, it should be noted, looks like a clam, cries like a human, and occasionally chirps like a bird. The pair quickly assume prototypical roles, SpongeBob as the mother and Patrick as the father because he doesn't wear shirts. In their roles, SpongeBob experiments with femininity and domestic life, while Patrick represents toxic masculinity and absence. They go for a walk at one point, dressed in drag, while a pair of heteronormative fish look on in confusion. The show puts this queer relationship in social context, showing them in contrast to and relation to the rest of society. This is a gentle way for the show to explore the performance of gender, show acceptance and inclusivity, while also telling an important message about how others may not always be as accepting. Next, there is a binary between underwater world and surface world, shown visually through animation versus live action. In the very first episode, the narrator exclaims,
Ah, the sea.
as real-life coral fades away to reveal the animated Bikini Bottom, making this binary clear right off the bat. Bikini Bottom, a name which already plays with sexuality, seems like a queer wonderland, full of bright colors, unique architecture, and upwardly mobile sea life. In the Season 2 episode, Pressure, Sandy dares SpongeBob and his friends to last on the surface world. When on the surface, SpongeBob appears shriveled and dry, despite his voice maintaining its high-pitched animated innocence.
We can do this! Hey, Patrick, come on up! The air is fine!
Patrick, Squidward, and Mr. Krabs follow, all becoming equally lifeless. When they leave the queer wonderland of Bikini Bottom, they become shells of themselves, no pun intended, as the oppressive atmosphere hides their color and individuality. There is undeniably something to this binary, which could perhaps be seen as a commentary on the oppressive nature of modern society towards queer inhabitants, or on the idea of being closeted, not being able to show your true self as a queer person. Finally, the episode Jellyfish Hunter perfectly encapsulates a queer ecology, or the approach to discussions of environment and biology through a queer lens, questioning binaries and hierarchies of species. In this episode, after catching a pink jellyfish, SpongeBob tickles it with a feather until it sneezes purple jelly into a jar. SpongeBob then uses this jelly in a Krabby Patty, and when it's a hit, Mr. Krabs tells our young sponge to capture as many jellyfish as possible in order to feed their
Whole ecosystem for the hungry paying customers.
thus merging nature with the market, and bringing discussions of capitalist exploitation into the episode. SpongeBob then destroys jellyfish fields, but not before the last remaining jellyfish ends up catching and jarring SpongeBob himself, leading him to a factory where Mr. Krabs is extracting the last of the jelly out of the captured jellyfish. Only from his packaged prison does SpongeBob realize the error of his ways and decide to break the creatures free. This episode shows the contrast in SpongeBob's approach to the jellyfish, humane, playful, even loving, with Mr. Krabs' cynicism and capitalistic drive. SpongeBob's draining of the goo, admittedly a queer parallel, feels symbiotic and sustainable, while Mr. Krabs' subsequent commercialization feels perverse and exploitative. In fact, the environmentalism doesn't stop there. The biggest controversy surrounding SpongeBob outside of its main character's queerness was probably SpongeBob Goes Green, a picture book from 2009 about Mr. Krabs flooding Bikini Bottom with carbon dioxide. That is a real thing that was published. In fact, in response to the book, Fox News' Fox and Friends accused Nickelodeon of, quote, pushing a global warming agenda. Of course, whenever a big company like Nickelodeon is involved, all of this tends to come back to marketing. Maybe SpongeBob being gay and pro-environment just sells better. Maybe this is all just rainbow capitalism. But the show's queerness feels like it goes deeper than that.
In a lagoon and kissed with coral blue #2 semi-gloss lipstick.
Actually, it's coral blue number.
Like it reflects a mesh of queer ecology, as Timothy Morton writes, an open-ended concatenation of interrelations that blur and confound boundaries at practically any level, between species, between living and non-living, between organism and environment. Intentional or not, SpongeBob is something of a symbol of environmentalism, and of queerness.
Bye, Mr. Krabs! Bye, Squidward.
You said bye, Squidward, twice.
I like Squidward.
There are plenty more examples of queerness in SpongeBob. From SpongeBob having to turn normal, to the practice date episode, to the time when Patrick dresses in drag to avoid an assassin.
When you could be talking to your girlfriend.
Come on, Patricia.
Bye.
It's a wild show. But these three show the true breadth of the show's queer commentary. SpongeBob blurs the boundaries between child and adult, sexual, asexual, gay and straight, work and play, nature and essence, populating its world with a sponge who belongs both in the sink and the sea, a butch squirrel who modifies her body in order to live in an underwater tree dome, a codependent starfish best friend with homoerotic undertones, a pet snail who meows like a house cat, a crab who parents a whale, and even fringe characters who appear to be an old married gay superhero couple. SpongeBob reflects an underwater world just as diverse and complex as our own. Clearly, people see and appreciate that reflection, as shown by the plethora of memes that have emerged from the show over the years. But maybe there's more under the surface of SpongeBob. If we just learn to use our
Imagination.